Hello all. So welcome to Hamiltonia. So I just finished grading all of the videos that you posted. Thank you for all of your efforts. I know that for several of you it wasn't easy or it wasn't comfortable, but you know, nobody's videos are perfect. I mean, I know mine certainly aren't. And I love that. I love that imperfection because I feel like it's real. I feel like you all are real people and you can see me for a real person, hopefully. And that's why we do this. I mean, in the online world, it's so easy to be disconnected and to see somebody's name on a screen and not really to see them as a person. You just see them as somebody that you interact with online. They might as well be a bot for all you know. So thank you for putting the efforts into the videos. Thank you for being uncomfortable and for your posts. I think all of them were fantastic. I mean, you might not be like, she mustn't have watched my video. Mine wasn't fantastic. No, they were all really good because I felt like you all met the learning outcomes for that assessment, which was to connect with the literature in a way that that made it personal and that you were thinking critically about it and that you learned something from it. And I did believe that every one of you learned something from it. So here we go. Here's my tome with all of my notes. So I'm going to start here and then I'm going to move to a couple of questions that you all had. So the first one is on page 103. And so on page 103, this was what occurred to me to ask the question and discussion board about whether you saw Lin-Manuel Miranda as Shakespeare. It seemed like most of you agreed, or if you didn't really have much to say about it, you didn't really understand why you didn't much, and that's fine. I mean, I wasn't asking for a doctoral dissertation or anything, but on page 103, this is on the rightmost column, about 3 paragraphs down. Lin does exactly what Shakespeare does, he says. He takes the language of the people and heightens it by making it verse. It both ennobles the language and the people saying the language. That's precisely what Shakespeare did in all of his work, particularly in his history plays. He tells the foundational myths of his country. By doing that, he makes the country the possession of everybody. So I thought that was interesting, and so my question to you all to consider in discussion wasn't necessarily about whether you read the book or not, but more about, just seeing if you agreed with that sentiment. I feel like whenever we compare somebody to Shakespeare, it feels too big, almost like they're, I don't know, too ambitious or maybe too arrogant, if they think that they would deign even to be Shakespeare, but I don't think Lin-Manuel Miranda is either of those things. I mean, he might be ambitious, I'm not saying he's not, but I mean, I don't think he's arrogant. I don't think he's somebody who wrote Hamilton to be known as Shakespeare, if that makes sense. So, I don't know, I just thought that was kind of an interesting point. Next one is page 133. Oh, I thought this was so cool. Okay, sorry, I got really excited. Page 133, left column, 2 paragraphs down. During the Yorktown sequence, when Washington consults the Comte de Rochambeau's map, Chris Jackson looks at Rochambeau's actual map, reproduced on parchment paper, treated with Mod Podge so it resembles sheepskin. Newspapers figure in several places during the show, and each one includes stories that ran in actual New York newspapers, drawn from the exact month the scene takes place. Jay and Sarah exempted only one kind of paper prop from this fastidious approach. Pamphlets that might end up falling into the audience were filled with nonsense strings of Latin words so as not to distract audience members from watching the show. So cool. And I mean, this whole assessment has the target of addressing the creative process. And this really kind of sticks out to me as this moment of You know, like how detailed is the creative process that even something so minute a detail as a map would actually be the right map. Or that the newspapers used in the show would be from the same date, from the same month that the scene takes place in. That attentiveness to detail is what I hoped to draw your attention to. Because when we write big stories, and I say big, not necessarily in terms of monumental value, or not necessarily in terms of like actual physical shape or size, but when we write big fiction, like for an advanced fiction course, what we're doing is we're creating a masterpiece, even if just for ourselves, where we need to be attentive to detail and to pay attention and to be very selective of our word choice and our setting and our characterization. And yeah, so I thought that was really moving to me. Page 134. Right column, third paragraph down. In a way, choreographers are like the architects of financial systems. They have to sense how little change here will shift a balance over there. They need microscopic focus on a macroscopic scale. During tech, Andy would cut across the crowded stage, adjust a performer's elbow, and cross back to the audience, never losing his stride or breaking his train of thought. Did anybody else see that as a metaphor for writing? Page 135. Left column, second paragraph. Seeing the two-part turntable installed and spinning at the public, Andy was delighted with all the subtle effects it could create. Counterclockwise motion, he felt, suggested the passage of time. Clockwise suggested resistance to the inevitable. Up on stage, on top of the thing, the actors tried to execute Andy's steps while being carried in two directions. Stephanie watched the cast's brains melting out of their ears. She spent the week feeling nauseous. I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't really feel like there's much more I can say other than I thought it was interesting. Page 136, leftmost column, third paragraph down. Alexander Hamilton was indispensable to the infant republic. All of our characters need to be indispensable to be in a story, right? As Lynn dramatizes, but you could say the same about Washington, Madison, and half a dozen other founders. It's possible that some of them could have won the war without the others, but would they have ratified the Constitution, and vice versa? The Founding Fathers did the impossible twice in 10 years because they did it together, supporting, inspiring, challenging, and correcting each other. I felt like this was speaking to critique groups, right? We as writers in the creative process can't do things alone. As a few of you know, I'm in a very supportive writing group, and I think it's indispensable to my writing. And hopefully you get that through this class, that you can see that there is some benefit to a critique group. And because there is a prereq to even get into this class, mine is ideally not the first class you've had a critique group for. And so hopefully, having had a critique group more than once, and for several of you, several times, has shown you that a critique group is indispensable to the writing life. You need somebody to challenge you and to support you. It's really important, and I think that whether you find critique groups in classes like this, or if you find critique groups in a writing group, or if you go to PWP, Professional Writers of Prescott, or if you join a writing group at the library, there's so many options available to you, and I think only the people who are truly serious about writing try several things, because it's really easy to go to a critique group, get burnt out, see that people are rude, listen to that one overpowering voice. And so that's kind of a moment where some people are like, meh, I don't really feel like that anymore. I don't feel like being emotionally beat up. And I totally get that. And I'm not saying that you should, sit through an unhealthy or a toxic critique group. But what I am saying is that push past that. Find another group, because I promise you there are great things to find from arriving at a truly excellent critique group. Okay, my next one is on page 157. 157, rightmost column at the bottom. This is interesting because we're talking about, the chapter is called Rapping for the Children Who Will One Day Rap for Themselves. And actually, this is a really good segue into one of the questions. Is this a new way of teaching? I know I've used it, obviously, from the video that I posted. I think Killian was the one who asked that. Is this a new way of teaching? Yeah, maybe. I definitely think that people have strong feelings about rap one way or the other. Either they really like it or they really don't like it. It's not like people, hear rap for the first time like they've never heard it and say, oh, well, that's interesting. Although, to be fair, I kind of did when I listened to Hamilton the first time. I don't like rap. I'm not a rapper. It's hard enough for me to chaperone school dances and listen to some of the music they listen to. But I listened to Hamilton, and at first it kind of took a little while for me to get into, but I thought it was funny. I thought it was a big joke. The first song I think I heard was, My Shot. I thought it was a big fat joke, and I laughed all the way through it, and I delighted in sharing it with my students. The first time I heard it was right after I had taught Revolutionary War literature. So we had wrapped up literature like October, I think, and I heard the musical in like November. And so here I was taking the kids back to the Revolutionary period, even though by then we had moved on to American Romanticism. And they kind of looked at me like, no, more of this again. But kids love rap. It's kind of shocking how much like a gangster beat makes, white little 15-year-olds act like bosses. It's hilarious to me that they do that. I just got back from a field trip where, driving out to California, we listened nonstop, no pun intended, nonstop to the musical, from beginning to end. And of course I knew it's like 85% of the words. Especially the fast ones with Marquis de Lafayette. I can't rap that fast, so I wasn't able to do those. But the kids are rapping along with me, and here we are delighting in these stories from like the Federalist Papers, and it's just, I love it. I absolutely love it, because when I taught the Federalist Papers before Alexander Hamilton, before Hamilton the musical, it was pulling teeth. Kids did not care. They just did not care. And it killed my soul, because here we are with the foundation of freedom, right? With defiance, and with, the age of enlightenment, where we wake up and say, wow, we actually get to decide what we as a people will put up with and what we won't put up with. It's so empowering. And for me to have kids read the Federalist Papers and like fall asleep in class, or to not even read it and to bomb the quizzes, it really, really bothered me, because I feel like, many of you were talking about like Hamilton, like what you had been exposed to about Hamilton, as we have studied him in history, and you're like, oh, well, I learned him in elementary school. Oh, well, the last time I knew anything about Hamilton, he was on the $10 bill. I feel like history in some ways is wasted on young people, because really history is about people's stories. And that's what I love about this musical, that it's people's stories, but it's also this kind of universal story, this fabric of freedom that we all share as Americans. And now I get to share that enthusiasm and the passion for our freedom and the passion for our empowerment built into the very fabric of our nation. I get to share that with kids who now actually listen, because there's a rap now that there's a cult following for. And if I've learned anything from teenagers, it's like, if there's a cult following, they have to figure out why. So it works for me. So I'm sorry, that was a really long explanation leading up to page 157, but 157 here. For the kids, the show wasn't over. Back in their classrooms in the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens, this students followed the TDF approach, which asks them to devise performances based on the plays they've seen. The Hamilton script had made Joe White mull some ideas for his students. What political issues are important to the students? What are we dealing with now that would be open to debate? I thought it would be cool to have them do rap battles with each other. He paired up his students and asked them to come up with pro and con positions on some tough issues, like gun control and same-sex marriage. Then they turned those arguments into raps and squared off in front of the class. He even asked them to incorporate a line from the show. Like, I love that, because even though, like I said, you know, not all of us are rappers. Not all of us appreciate rap. But there's something about that kind of beat that transforms an adolescent mind from something that's more focused about, like, Grand Theft Auto, into suddenly now, oh wait, now we can care about real issues. Now we feel like we have a voice. Now we feel like somebody's going to listen. And I feel like that is the American spirit that this musical tries to instill in people, is that we all get a vote. We all get a say. And a lot of sacrifices were made so that we do all get a say. And so often we waste our voice. And that's another thing I love about using Hamilton in an advanced fiction course. You all have a voice. You all have something to say. And you can attribute those themes and those messages into your fiction, just like Lin-Manuel Miranda did in his, we'll call it creative nonfiction. My next reference is on page 160. It's in the rightmost column. What will it mean when thousands of students step into these roles at age 15 or 18 or 20? Roles that have changed the lives of the original cast members who encountered them at significantly later age. Leslie says that playing a founding father has made him feel newly invested in the country's origins, something that always seemed remote from his life as a black man in America. The empathy that requires, the connections you make, the lines you draw between the things you want and the things they wanted, that you love and they loved. I never found all that connective tissue before this show. So I think that's why this musical is as big as it is, because there is empathy and connective tissue that we can see and we can reflect issues from then into issues of today. And I don't want to like talk about the politics part of it so much as the, you know, there's nothing new under the sun, that humans struggle with a lot of themes and concepts, especially in cultures, and a lot of these things that they struggled for then are things that we struggle for now because it's part of our heritage. And to ignore that, I think, is to pretend that it doesn't exist. Because, you know, you've been there just like I've been there with political conversations that get out of hand and they turn into character assassination and they turn into heated debate and people aren't ready to listen because of their confirmation bias. And, you know, we've all been there. But this musical asks us to get a little bit bigger than that, to get a little bit above the specific issues and the character assassination into something a little bit bigger, like, you know, like why do we care about the issues? Like, you know, what's the status of your heart? What are your ambitions? And I think that's something that we all can relate to. We all have, you know, ambitions, and we all have things that we want to see in our country happen because we care about people. And so, you know, and that's where I feel like a lot of the really good messages were here. And then my last reference to the book is on page 174, and this is kind of speaks to what I was just saying. Leftmost column, second paragraph. By writing about Hamilton, you're really writing about America today, he wrote after listening to a new Hamilton song in 2011. In the end, I guess I'm saying stay with this, even when it seems opaque and impossible and drives you crazy. Stay with your novel, stay with your play, stay with your poem, even when it seems opaque and impossible and drives you crazy. We've all been there. That's why revision sucks so much. Okay, so a couple of things that you guys mentioned. Several of you mentioned that the theme of throwing away your shot, or not throwing away your shot, as the song says. So Hamilton declares that he's not going to throw away his shot, and then as Noel very eloquently said, he actually throws away his shot 3 times. So there's a kind of irony there. Marcus, in his assessment, called this hypocrisy, which I think is also appropriate. And then one of you, I can't remember who it was, but one of you drew out this quote from Stephen Sondheim, and I thought it was brilliant. Every creative act is working a puzzle. Every creative act is working a puzzle. That's why My Shot took years to write, and the musical took years, but My Shot took up proportionately more years, right? I mean, like, My Shot, gosh, was it 3 years it took him to write, and the musical itself took 6, so, you know, he wrote, 2 acts worth of musicals in the same amount of time that it took him to write, the one song. So every creative act is working a puzzle. How is your writing working a puzzle? What are you trying to solve? What are you trying to do? These are very heavy questions for us as writing artists. What is it that you want to say? When I was in grad school, my mentor said, what story do you want to write which has never yet been written? She said, if you could write any story, if you were to die tomorrow and you'd be known for one story, what would it be? And I was like, crap, no, I'll never write a story. It's too big, right? It's too daunting to think of it that way, but it's true. So, your work is a puzzle, so try and solve it. See what happens. Joe had a question about killing your darlings, which I'm going to put in my next lesson. My next lesson is going to be focused around revision and rewriting and re-envisioning, so I'm going to put Kill Your Darlings in there, so listen out for that. But the reason I wanted to mention it is because Benjamin Franklin. So he mentions in the book that Benjamin Franklin was supposed to be in the musical, but he was so big and so fantastic that he was going to steal the show. So Benjamin Franklin got cut, and it kind of makes me sad because Benjamin Franklin is larger than life. I read his autobiography a couple years ago when I was curriculum building for my junior English lesson plan. And there's this one section in his autobiography where he pops in a bunch of anecdotes, it's kind of like the book of Proverbs, and that he gives a lot of advice. But he is mentioning Poor Richard. As Poor Richard says, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. And then he'll say something else. And then he'll say, I'll sleep when I'm dead, Poor Richard says. Which, by the way, I'll sleep when I'm dead is a Benjamin Franklin quote, which I didn't realize until I read that. So I'm just thinking, like, he's quoting Poor Richard all the time. Who is this Poor Richard? So I looked it up. Yeah, Poor Richard is him. So Benjamin Franklin created a pseudonym that he then used to quote himself all the time. Like, he was just larger than life. He was brilliant and arrogant and a genius and a not good person, and lots of not school appropriate words I could use, and wonderful and awful all at the same time. And Lin-Manuel Miranda has a song, and he cut it from the musical, and this is why I'm mentioning it. Because it was in the chapter, and it was the Kill Your Darlings message. But I am going to provide a link for you in the notes for this video. I will have the link to the Benjamin Franklin song. I'm trying to find the one that doesn't drop the F-bombs, because I know that would be a little less offensive. If possible, I'll provide both links to you, but it's a funny song, and it's kind of a shame that he cut him. But the Kill Your Darlings thing is very real, and Lin-Manuel Miranda felt that Benjamin Franklin wasn't adding anything to the story, and that's why he cut him. So keep that in mind for when I do my Kill Your Darlings lesson. In the meantime, that is it on Hamilton. Thank you all for listening. Please follow your writing voice. Only you can tell your story. So don't let the critique groups get to you. I mean, you guys have been wonderful in our critique groups, but I just mean like outside of my class. Don't let the critique groups get to you. Don't let your self-defeating, tired, monkey mind thoughts get to you. You have an important story. You have something to say. You have something that nobody else can tell our world. Use that. Be empowered by that. Use it like a vote, right? You have something to submit to our culture, so please do so. And go with it. All right, my dear ones. Thank you for listening.